This is a recording of the Saturday afternoon section of the AIA's 50th anniversary conference held at the University of Bath in September 2023. There are separate recordings of the Friday, Saturday morning and Sunday morning events. The Saturday afternoon proceeded with 3 short talks from our award winners, introduced by Professor Marilyn Palmer and Dr. Ian West. The 3 are George Demidowicz, winner of the 2023 Peter Neaverson Award, who spoke on the Soho Manufactory, Mint and Foundry, where Boulton, Watt and Murdoch made history. Patrick Grattan, winner of the 2023 Publication Award, who spoke on the history of Oasts and hop kilns. And John McGuinness, winner of the 2022 Dissertation Award, spoke about his paper, A Study of Technology and the Consequent Use of Space in Low-Status Housing in England and Wales, 1914 to 1975. After a tea break, Dr. Ian West introduced 3 more award winners. Neil Parkhouse, who spoke for the late David Pollard, who sadly died before publication, about his book, Digging Bath Stone, A Quarry and Transport History, which won the 2022 Peter Neaverson Award. Anthony Anakin Smith, winner of the 2023 Dissertation Award, who spoke on the Neston Collieries, 1759 to 1855, an industrial revolution in rural Cheshire, and Masakai Okada, who received an honourable mention for his work, Fascinating Industrial Landscapes in Britain. At the end of the afternoon, Professor Palmer invited Miles Oglethorpe to give a brief talk about TICI and their conference in Quebec in 2022.
Thank you for coming back so promptly. I hadn't realised we were just going to be outside. I thought we were over the road. So I'm glad it was so quick. We now come to the afternoon where we announce or deal with the various people who won awards from the association. We give awards for publications, we give awards for dissertations, and as Ian will explain in a moment, we have award for outstanding scholarship.
2 steps to that.
Oh,
Not me.
no, it's that. Sorry. For those of you who are sharing screen, we're just moving to the award presentations for this afternoon. Our awards for publications, our awards for dissertations, and our awards for outstanding scholarship, which Ian will talk about. I coordinate the publications and dissertation awards group of judges. Ian does the same for the Peter Neaverson Award for outstanding scholarship. Stand in front of that. You can't. You've got to go there. Come down. Yes. Don't worry. Okay.
Yes. So this award for outstanding scholarship is named in honour of Peter Neaverson, who nearly died. No, nearly 20. It's nearly 2005, so 18 years ago, who left a legacy which funds this award. And so this is for outstanding scholarship in industrial archaeology, and we regard it as one of our most important awards. And I convene the judges panel for this, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome our winner for this year. We've got winners for last year to deal with later. So anyway, I need to get in here, don't I? So here, I can show it to the camera. This is an utterly splendid book, Soho Manufactory, Mint and Foundry, West Midlands. And it's another successful product of the partnership between Historic England and Liverpool University Press, which has dominated this award for several years, simply because both the content and the production of these books has been utterly wonderful. Subtitle of this book is Where Boulton, Watt and Murdoch Made History, and that's something of an understatement, really. I think there's hard to think of another site anywhere in the world which has had such an influence on the process of industrialization, with the development of James Watt's improvements to steam technology, pioneering of gaslighting by William Murdoch, which is a subject dear to my heart, and many other technical innovations. The complexities of these sites and of Boulton and Watt's very convoluted business empire, and the huge volume of material left in their archives at Birmingham has made a comprehensive study of this task quite daunting. And this book is distillation of 30 years of research, really. And
On and off.
yeah, I first met George 20 years ago. We were discussing this earlier. And 2004, he took me to the Foundry, Soho Foundry site, which was then and still is in a very perilous and quite dangerous site. The activities of Boulton and Watt, the amazing archive left behind, inspired me to some extent with my PhD. So I would just like you all to welcome George Demidowicz to talk about his wonderful prize-winning book, Soho Manufactory, Mint and Foundry.
Thank you. Set me off. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. And the first one. Okay. There we are. So, eyes. Okay, right on. Okay. Good afternoon. I've only got 15 to 20 minutes, and in those few minutes, it's only scratching the surface of what's in this book, and what's in this book is only scratching the surface of the fabulous Soho archive in what's called now the Library of Birmingham, but used to be called Birmingham Reference Library. Yes. I think I'll have to talk to the screen, if you don't mind, so everyone can see me as well. To get our bearings, there's Birmingham city centre in this position here. Smethwick on the other, on the west, and the boundary between Smethwick and now Sandwell is this line here. You can see that the Soho Mint and the Soho Manufactory are within Birmingham, and the Soho Foundry was in Smethwick, now Sandwell Council area. It's important to distinguish between the three Soho sites, as they've been confused both in the popular literature and in the academic literature. Never mind the awful stuff that you can read on the internet nowadays as well. So caveat emptor on anything on the internet. The Soho Manufactory, to start with, was established in 1761 by Matthew Boulton as a hardware manufacturer or as a toy manufacturer. Now, toys in Birmingham are not playthings, they're personal mantelpiece and tableware produced for the middle class market and the aristocratic market. So it was established as a toy manufactory. It was a hardware manufactory in 1761, and the last buildings were demolished in the 1850s, and the last one in 1863, the principal building, which I'll be mentioning in a few moments. The Soho Mint was established by Matthew Boulton in 1788, just 100 yards away, as the first steam engine powered mint in the world. And that was also demolished in the 1850s. So there's nothing surviving above ground on the Soho Manufactory and Mint site. However, at the Soho Foundry, there are standing buildings, just about, as you'll see. But this was established by the second generation Boulton Watt, James Watt Jr. and Matthew Robinson Boulton, but particularly James Watt Jr., established in 1795, and by, as you can see, the Birmingham Canal, so that those engines could be taken away more conveniently than over the road. Its buildings still stand. You can see how significant the sites are because they've been commemorated on banknotes and on stamps. But there's one person missing, the third man, William Murdoch, and a particular hero. He's a particular hero of mine, William Murdoch. A little bit about him later. This is what the site of the Soho Manufactory looks like today. Factories, houses, back gardens. This is historic Handsworth, which was taken into Birmingham in 1911. If you overlay the layout of the manufactory and mint over a current ordnance survey map, this is you can see here the position of the manufactory, which had its own separate works established from the 1770s onwards in this area here. So there was an engine works attached to the Soho Manufactory. Again, a reason for some confusion between the two sites. There's also the Latchet or the Crescent building, a little bit about that later, and then the peculiar shape of the Soho Mint over on this side of the road in people's back gardens. And the only standing building is the most important part of Soho House, which is Matthew Boulton's house, his original house. The later extension has been demolished. So the only standing building at the Soho Manufactory and Mint is Matthew Boulton's house itself. The classic view of the manufactory is this one on the left, where the principal building, a sort of Palladian mansion, which was a silverware manufactory with some accommodation and warehousing as well. That dominates the foreground. The Crescent building is to the left. You can see quite significant buildings, but hidden because they're cascading down the slope, because there is a break of slope here, which was exploited by a water mill, which is the origin of the Soho Manufactory site. You can actually see the water mill, the mill pond here on the right. The same view today. You wouldn't know at all. So the principal building from here to there is roughly from there to about there. And the same slope is being cascaded down by a terrace of housing built around the turn of the 20th century. But we have, in compensation for the loss of the buildings on site, although the archaeology does survive, we've got the fabulous Soho collection, the Soho archive. It's the Matthew Boulton collection, the Boulton and Watt collection, and the James Watt papers, the James Watt collection. And it's that material that allows us to produce a documentary history, but also use the images and plans to reconstruct the appearance of the manufactory. This is it in about 1805 at its maximum extent. So you can see the images that I've been able to use, very fortunately those from the rear, and you can see the difference in level between the principal building and the main buildings at the rear. That's the break of slope, which was originally exploited by the water mill. Only 2 plans survive, but they're sufficient for me to be able to raise, many years ago now, an axonometric drawing. And in the process of reconstructing the buildings from the varied evidence, I was able to work out actually what the water was doing. And the most important thing is that we now know what the James Watt engine, which is in the Science Museum, was trying to do when it first arrived in 1774. So we've got the mill pool on the left. Water was then brought onto the front of the building and then taken over the mill. The mill has always been in this site roughly, and originally the water went into was lost into a mill pool below the Upper Hockley pool. What the first working James Watt engine in the world was employed to do was well, first of all, the water was intercepted And what it did, it pumped water up 24 feet back round the side of the principal building, along the front of the canal, and back over the water wheel. So the first working James Watt steam engine in the world was a circulating engine, circulating water. It was aiding a water mill. Water power was still extremely important, as you'll see, and is the origin of the site. Boulton came here because there was a feeble mill, which he obviously completely transformed. And here is Old Bess, as she was called, in the Science Museum. The cylinder was changed from 18 inches to 33 inches in 1777, if I remember. And it was rescued by the Science Museum and has been there ever since. It belongs in Birmingham, but you can't, it's too late now. Repatriate to Birmingham, it's interesting. The Soho Mill was much expanded and was completely reorganized in 1785. The second engine, which is on display at the Science Museum, which is called the lap engine, it's this one here, it was attached to the water mill. Here it is, you can see it's beam here, and it was attached to drums which then by leather belt had laps, polishers, because these metal objects needed to be polished. You need to have a fine finish, and so a lap mill is extremely important in the hardware industry. That left the water wheel to concentrate on the rolling of metal, and in particular from 1788 the rolling of copper for Matthew Boulton's coinage in which was started to be produced in the Soho Mint. So the two engines, the two very famous engines, are down in the Science Museum, but they were rescued. That was the most important thing at the time. They might have been scrapped. Looking at the whole site again, we've just been here is the Soho Manufactory site, and we've been looking at the watermill here, passing through on towards the Soho Mint, which is about 100 yards away. A most peculiar shape is the Latchet Works, the Crescent building. So what is a latchet? This is a latchet. It's a springy buckle which can be moved from one shoe to the other. So instead of having to buy another pair of shoes, all you need to do is buy several of these latchets, and you could hook them onto your shoe, so you didn't have to buy a separate pair of shoes for each fashionable buckle. But the buckles went out of fashion in the early 18th century. No, sorry, the early 19th century, and so the latchet works became redundant in about 1807, 1808. But onto the Soho Mint. The first Soho Mint was established in 1788 by Matthew Boulton, hidden away in garden buildings. It was built away from the manufactory for secrecy, and hidden in garden buildings, a fairy farm as it was called, and menagerie pens as well. And that was the coining room, and the steam engine was in this position. The steam engine mechanically moved the presses, but they decided that it was not a good method. So in 1798 to 99, when Matthew Boulton won the national coinage contract, they decided that the steam engine would then produce through pumps a vacuum. So from there on, from 1798 onwards, the Boulton's technology in moving coinage was through vacuum power from that period. In the second generation, Matthew Robinson Boulton, in 1822 to 24, there was another complete reorganization of the Mint. And there are drawings of the individual buildings, but no overall layout. But the documentation is sufficient to be able to establish that there was a 60-meter, 200-foot long underground drive shaft. And with a piece of paper at 2 scale, I just fiddled around on a reconstruction, and that shaft could only be in this position, driven by the new steam engine from here, but in this direction for machinery, in this direction, and ending in the center of the old latchet works, where a new cutting out press, coining press, a coin cutting room was established. The old coining press was in the Soho mill, and in fact, lap engines should strictly be described as the lap and coin cutting out engine, rather than just a lap engine, because that's what it was doing until 1824. It was a bit of a risk, I must admit, but the only way I could prove the theory was to persuade Time Team, who were extremely reluctant. One, they were used to just wandering around fields, and if it was wrong here, then we can just pop across the field to another one. This is back gardens in Handsworth, really difficult. But because we can plot the archaeology reasonably well, I was quite confident that the shaft ran in this position to the center of the coin cutting room in here. So in 1996, it was there also, they were reluctant because it was their first industrial archaeological excavation. They hadn't done one before. It was all open field stuff. It's Roman, Anglo-Saxon, whatever, prehistoric. This was the first industrial archaeological one. So they were rather nervous. We found the front of the manufactory building in this position here, and Soho 2 and 3, right at the top of people's back gardens. We found the tunnel itself, and also at Soho 5, and in Soho 4, the front of the cutting out room itself. And this is what it looked like. This is people's back gardens, and we got permission. They weren't too well tended, so it was negotiated. And this is Soho 2. It's the tunnel which contained a shaft. It's 60 meters long, roughly, running towards the cutting out room. It was roughly three feet high. It's about 3 feet high. So we've lost the top, but very fortunately, the bottom of the tunnel survives. There it is in Soho 2, and the most important excavation was this one with the tunnel running in our direction. Because can you see that block there? That great big block. There were 4 of those which supported the pulley, the 3-foot pulley, which was driven directly from the steam engine. So what I've done on the right-hand side, I've reversed the drawing because in order to show it better, you can see that pulley, which was this one here. It was a leather belt wrapped round. There were tightening belts, tightening wheels here, around a 5-foot wheel on the steam engine, driven directly by the steam engine. So this is the important link to the steam engine itself. The steam engine and site has been totally destroyed. Onto the foundry, where buildings do survive. Just to get your bearings again, this is the Birmingham-Sandwell boundary. So you can see it's just within Sandwell and in historic Smethwick. The whole foundry site is this one here. The buildings that survive are at the west end, and you can see how closely they are to the Birmingham Canal. Very important to be able to ship away the heavy steam engines once they've been manufactured. Avery Waitronics are the current owners of the whole site, and they've owned the Soho Foundry site from 1895, so they've been there from that year. So their buildings are here. Their current production spaces are over here. Here, this is the east-west drag, this is the east-west drag, which runs right up to the canal. You can see that's the main entrance, and it runs more or less towards the canal. The buildings, as you can see, are derelict and have been abandoned since the 1960s and just decayed away. They've been, when I first came on site, they were in relatively recent condition. There was also established in 1860 a Soho Foundry mint. So there's more confusion. There's two mints, but this is from 1860, using that old technology, the technology where coining presses are run through vacuum power. A view of the main foundry building, the main casting shop, but the main casting shop's always been called the Foundry as well. In 2008, Sandwell, Avery Waitronics, and Historic England, or English Heritage as it were then, paid quite a large amount of money to protect the roof of the main Soho Foundry building. You can see that there. It starts off modestly. It's the first purpose-built steam engine manufacturer in the world, but fairly modest. This is 1795, 1796 when it was first established. There's the main foundry building right against the canal with its own canal basin, engine houses and turning shops and boring mills, smith shops and pattern stores. Quite a modest establishment in those very early years. Don't worry too much about the detail here, just to show you how it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But unfortunately, in getting bigger, it became more and more obsolete. So by 1895, James Watt Company had taken over from Boulton and Watt. They sold out. They abandoned the whole site, and Avery's, a Birmingham firm of weighing machine manufacturing, they took the site over. So it was a huge site, and Avery's have demolished most of the buildings on this site, but because industrial archaeology is so robust and deep, it's been relatively well protected. This is the foundry building as I first saw it. It's 1996 when I came on site. This is 1997. This is the foundry building looking from the south. And as you can see, it doesn't take long for the buddleia and for the vegetation to start sprouting out of these buildings. The earliest view that we've got of the Soho Foundry is this one of 1747. You can see that gable there with the three semicircular windows. Those three semicircular windows are these here. The photograph was taken in 1895, just before Avery took the site over. It was abandoned by James Watt and Company, but it was realized that this was an important site. So about 120 photographs were taken of the site, so it's an extremely important source. What Avery's did was to remove the giant timber triangular trusses and put Belfast trusses over the top. So hence they truncated the top, the top of the gable, and they filled in, as you can see, they filled in the windows, which are visible on the previous view and photograph. How am I doing for time? Have I got 5? Yeah. I'm all right for time. I'm all right for time. Okay, so I can. William Murdoch. Everyone knows about Matthew Boulton and James Watt in particular, but I'm a great fan of William Murdoch. So it's the Soho Foundry is the first purpose-built steam engine manufacturer in the world, but it's also the first industrial building in the world to be lit by gas, and it's all down to William Murdoch. So I quote from 3 sources. In the year 1798, I removed from Cornwall to Messrs. Boulton and Watt and Company's works for the manufacture of steam engines at the Soho Foundry, and then constructed an apparatus upon a larger scale than in Cornwall, which during many successive nights was applied to the lighting of their principal building. So that's the the casting shop, the main foundry building. So James Watt provided more detail when recalling events in 1809. William Murdoch constructed a retort of iron with a tube from it of about 30 to 40 feet in length, and to the end he applied burners of various dimensions and gave light during the night time to one of the buildings of the Soho Foundry. Now, more details, very fortunately, in an 1805 memo. The laboratory was listed in an inventory as being in arch under the foundry for furnaces. And in later inventories, the same arches were described as being near the laboratory. The laboratory is a very important place to find if we can find it. And we've got the clues being near these arches and the laboratory being close to these arches. So where are these arches? In the main foundry building. This is the building in 1790 up to 1800 before the extension. So we're talking about this part of the building. It's because the land is sloping this way, the building is much taller on the north side, so call it 2 stories, while it's only 1 story on this side, which allows it to have an upper ground level, which is the casting level, and a lower ground level in which there's a great arch and also the bottom of the casting pit. The drying stoves were built against the north wall, but because there was a big drop there and they needed to remove the ash, they constructed 5 arches forming a platform so that the drying stove ash could be removed across and then dumped onto this huge ash bank. But on various plans, there is a interesting little structure here, which I'm suggesting is the laboratory, a vault orientated east-west rather than north-south. And if this is the end of the foundry in 1798 in December, a 30 to 40 foot long pipe from here somewhere into the foundry would light the foundry very, very comfortably. Where is that laboratory? At lower ground level, the laboratory if we walk through into this arch here, the laboratory is through that wall. To get at it archaeologically from above, you'd have to go through the upper ground level and all the sand that's still deposited in the casting shop, but you could get at it from above, or you could possibly break part of the wall down. Whether the retorts are still in there, it would be wonderful, but that's where I'm suggesting that William Murdoch's laboratory was and where that first retort was placed to light the foundry in December 1798. I finish with a plug, if I may. This is it. Only scratch. I mean, I was looking at the material I'd collected not long ago, trying to sort it out and put some files away, and it's vast. Just the stuff I collected and noted and photographed, and I realised only a small part of it had gone into there. It's a huge, huge, huge archive, and there's plenty of more work to be done on that archive for future historians for many, many generations. But anyway, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to write this book. I'm surprised with it being such a significant building that no one took the opportunity before me to do so. And so I'm very grateful to have been able to do it. So thank you very much.
Is that working? Yes. Unfortunately, I could get here so I can be on camera. George isn't able to be with us at dinner this evening because he's got a better offer. So we're going to do the presentation of his certificate and check now, and Bill is going to record the scene for posterity. Can I just also mention in the next issue of IA News for IA members, AIA members, there's an extra discount on the book. There'll be a code in there that you can use to get even more than the usual discount on the book. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you.
You have that bit and that bit,
And that bit.
and I'll get out of the way.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. That was very interesting. I've been round the site.
Yeah.
As you say, it's not very easy to interpret, but
No, I wasn't let on the site for 14 years. I've only just gone onto
Yeah.
the site in recent years.
I agree with you about the archive.
Yes.
That's the one Jenny Tan used as well. isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you
Yes,
did.
I have also looked at it for
Yes.
various steam engines around the East
Fabulous,
Midlands that power
fabulous.
textile mills. So to hand over to you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Bill. Would you like to take it?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yes, okay, like that.
There we are.
Don't reveal the amount on the check.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your evening.
Yep. Oh, I forgot to show you the cartwheel tuppence. Totally impractical. This was on those vacuum powered presses produced in 1797, 1798. Totally impractical, and the penny was also impractical, so they fell out of use very quickly. But they are beautiful objects, as Boulton wished them to be. They're aesthetic objects as well as something mechanically produced by the steam engine. The buckle, here it is. So the buckle has got teeth, 2 teeth on this side, and they catch onto the shoe. So they clasp onto the shoe. So you can take it off one shoe, put it onto another. But your shoe has to have the indentation so that the teeth can catch onto it. So I bought that from someone in Australia. Bolton and Smith. How on earth it ended up in Australia, I have no idea. But anyway, I was very pleased.
So this is one to buckle my shoe.
Yes.
Remember
And
that?
Repatriated.
Repatriate. Thank you very much,
Okay.
George. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Leave you your microphone, you say something
Oh, yes.
about it.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
You realise that Liverpool University Press took over from the Historic England Press, and they keep in touch with us all the time. And several of our Peter Neaverson Award winners have been published by that particular press, which is why there are copies on the table where John McGuinness was from Liverpool University Press. Right, I'll let you go. Our next award, we were able to present some of the awards last year when we had that meeting that John McGuinness organised in Liverpool. We presented the Publication Award and one of the Dissertation Awards. So this year's winner of the Publication Awards is the Oasts and Hop Kilns, produced by Patrick Grattan. Now, I trust all of you have read Amber Patrick's review of this book in Industrial Archaeology Review in the last issue. Importantly, I think she said that there are not many surviving, and the book really helps people who are converting Oast houses. If you've been into Kent, you'll know there are lots of converted Oast houses to preserve the original features of them. So it's a very important book to us. If you'd like to come and tell us about it, Patrick. You're just talking to us, aren't you? You do.
I do.
And you need to stand in front of that screen for all the people who are sharing
Right.
on
Yes.
screen.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And really, I should add, of course, Amber Patrick's book on malt kilns will be coming out towards the end of the year. So that they will make a pair on these related buildings. But I've decided not to show slides, but to try and highlight 1 or 2 issues that I think will resonate with the wider fields of industrial archaeology, because this subject is more strongly rooted in agrarian territory, so it's very different from the last subject. And it's even the fields of agricultural history and of the vernacular architecture. My first experience of this subject was as a teenage hop picker before the mechanical hop picking machine had even been invented, and now they've almost gone. I had no great expertise, I have to say, in industrial archaeology, and I did not, when I did my original work in 1960, do nearly enough on that aspect of it, which is a great pity, because what has gone most of all is all the heating and pipework systems inside the buildings, which are now no longer there, and I did not make good records of them. I should make clear that oast houses and hop kilns are the same thing. They're different words for the same building. Oasts found in Kent and Sussex, and hop kilns found in Hampshire and Farnham, and in Hereford and Worcestershire. To set the scene, in 1900, England was the largest producer of hops in the world. It had been for the previous 200 years. By the time I got involved in 1960, America and Germany had caught up, but we were still a very major part of the whole world hop scene. And by 2000, there were only about 100 active hop farms and hop drying left in Britain. We'd fallen to 1% of the world's production. In the book, I highlight some of the reasons or some of the factors which played into this and why England did particularly badly. But I'm left very much with the question, should that have been the outcome? Could it have been different? Why did we so much lose out in this territory in the previous 100 years? And could we have done things differently? I don't have answers to those questions, but I'm sure that those questions resonate in other ways in areas of industrial archaeology. The function of an oast house is to reduce the humidity of newly picked hops from about 80% by weight to around 15%. So they're preserved, pressed into long bags called pockets, and transported to breweries. The original function in brewing of hops was all about preservation, not about taste and bittering. In fact, the main objective of the army, of the government, was to have a form of alcohol which survived long enough to travel to the continent with the army and to tank up the soldiers and make them fit for battle. From the exterior, old oasts do not look very different from other wood and brick structures. Inside, however, there was a raised platform with a slatted drying floor and a brick fireplace beneath. Smoke, fumes, and impurities such as sulfur went through the hops and escaped through cracks in the roof. One question for me, which I think I want to share, is why it took so long to grasp the respective roles of heat and draft. The original advice of experts was to seal up a kiln so there were no cracks so that the heat couldn't get out. It was only gradually in the 18th century that everybody realized that draft was as important as heat. In fact, in Bavaria, they didn't add heat. They just put the hops on the top floors, normally about 8 floors up, of those wonderful Bavarian pointed houses, and left them to dry up there in the attic. And Flanders, they did sometimes have heating, but the main system was to line the roof inside of the ceiling with straw vertically, so that as the heat rose from the drying hops, it condensed onto the straw and rolled down the straw and out through the eaves. So there were extraordinary differences between the different countries, and I remain puzzled and wonder to what extent in fields that you're concerned with, you see these dramatic differences between the different countries. The evolution of oasts into striking buildings with tall pyramidal and round kilns happened in the 18th and into the 19th century. That was because they needed to increase the throughput to respond to the demand in the Industrial Revolution from large urban populations and from empire. So kilns had to handle larger volumes, and if you didn't make the kilns larger, all you did was fry the hops, and they were then useless. The merits of round kilns, as opposed to square kilns, was hotly debated. Why was it that square kilns never really caught on in Surrey and Hampshire and the West Midlands? But in Kent and Sussex, they became pretty obsessed with round kilns as being much, much better. And why was it 50 years later that the experts decided that round kilns weren't so good, so they went back to square kilns. I don't know the answer to these questions because there's on these kind of rather local farming issues, they weren't recorded. But the fact is, it's very puzzling, and of course, it creates a great diversity of buildings. And I wonder whether similar twists and turns happen in other forms of drying in industrial architecture. At the top was the wooden cowl with carved vane, which turned with the wind and kept the rain out, and is a very iconic feature of hop buildings today. Again, there are very few records of how it emerged, the cowl and the carving on it, but they've become a great feature because planners, the planning law now insists that if you're converting an oast into a house, you have to either keep a cowl or put one back if it wasn't there. So one feature is that now oasts are a very visible symbol of hop territory where there are often no longer any further hops. Alas, this did not apply to the mechanical interior. So in the territory that some of you may be more focused on, a more woeful story is there. There needs to be a decent survey coming back, taking on where I was years ago, to look at just what has survived. And the problem is how to find it now. Because one of the biggest things I noticed since I did this original work was that even as a teenager who might have been regarded as suspicious, prowling around a farm, nobody seemed to mind how much I poked my nose into things and explored the territory with the farmers and their colleagues. Whereas now I find a deep suspicion towards strangers wandering onto other people's land, which I still do and realize that I'm out of date. That's a problem. Hops were actually the most profitable, but also the most volatile of any agricultural product. They were highly speculative, and they were the hoppers were very puzzling about technical advance. When the thermometer was invented, the average response of hop growers and hop dryers was they didn't need a thermometer because they could tell the temperature without one. They were not good at advancing to new technology. And what actually happened was that the Germans and Americans got moving on the technology, leaving us behind in the 20th century. And for example, a leading Oregon hop farmer came to England in 1905, and I quote his comments, that oast houses are regarded by progressive American growers as 50 years behind the times and offer few tests of value except how not to do it. A pretty depressing comment, right? But it didn't seem to put people off. There's little work being done on the rather specialized engineering services along the Medway Valley, the Medway River in Kent, for example. There are a whole series of plants that have closed down now, and it's not territory that I've gone into, but it seems quite hard to get hold of information about these small scale engineering plants. It's also quite hard to remember, it's only about 120 years ago that mains electricity appeared in most rural areas. And the introduction of the electric fan in kilns was a massive change at that stage, making much better regulation of temperature and improving the quality of drying. But the fact is, in the literature, drying remained an art, not a science. If I had to, I'd like to mention, if I had to choose one building to save, I mentioned this to you, that it would be an 18th century hop kiln in Farnham, one of the hop capitals of Britain, called Coxbridge Farm. This is about to be surrounded by 350 houses on its former land, and has a very remarkable interior of wooden structured kilns. And there is no museum of hops in Britain today, whereas there are three hop museums in Bavaria. So that's a little challenge to pick up, to try and turn that into a hop museum. And finally, I'd just throw in a mention about hop picking machines, which are slightly outside my territory. I don't know whether many of you have seen hop picking machines in work. They are very extraordinary things. They look like sledgehammers to crack a nut. They are enormous beer moths in which these very small little flowers with lupulin pollen are separated off from the plant, from the vine. And there was one British manufacturer, Brough, based in Suckley in Worcestershire, which has now ceased operations, but produced one of the best of these hop picking machines. And there's another target to ensure, some of them are still in use, ensure that at least one survives for the future. So there's a few challenges, and I think it's a time to have some questions, or yes, yes. Would anybody like to ask any questions about all that, or do in future come back to me, and I'd love to follow up any issues or issues you have that I could help with.
Any questions?
When you say electric pan, does that couple with electric heat?
No. I mean the move then after moving away from charcoal and anthracite was to oil eventually, but they didn't come into have electric industrial heaters for drying until well into the 1960s and 1970s.
Right, thank you, Patrick. We'll see you and present you with your certificate and your check
Oh,
tonight.
So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Just think of all that next time you go to the bar. And think about Amber's book on malt kilns coming out later this year as a companion volume. That would be splendid. I look forward to that. Right, our last speaker before tea is our hard-working conference secretary. John McGuinness does not spend all his time behind a registration table, whatever you might think. He's been working for some years on his PhD thesis, which was awarded by the University of London.
West London.
West London, sorry, West London, I've got this. There is a West London. And John's been interested in working class housing, low status housing for a very long time. So this is John McGuinness, the scholar, as opposed to John McGuinness, the conference secretary.
Thank you, Marilyn.
You are, John.
Oh.
Which one is yours? That one. No.
That one. Right. Right, and I move it on by pressing that one.
Use this. Use the
Right.
left and right arrows.
And can I point with this on the screen?
You can use
I can use the.
this one for.
I usually just. Oh, right.
There's a pointer on there.
Oh, there's a point on here as well.
You've got one hand on it.
Oh, jolly good. Yes. Thank goodness I haven't got 5 hands. Well, first of all, I feel very honoured to be receiving this award, which was only made possible because the University of West London were prepared to take me on, and to the due help and advice I received from my tutors, namely Dr. Mahtab Fashini, Dr. Elizabeth Darling, and Professor Maddie Hoy. The background to this research, this research follows on from my earlier work, as Marilyn said, which started with an interest in the early use of concrete in housing. And this slide shows, first of all, got the wrong slide here. Sorry, I must have jumped here. So this slide shows, first of all, Yeah, so that's the toll house at Axmouth, and it claims to be the oldest inhabited concrete house in the country. I also quite early on came across these two pair of concrete houses at Tregoran in Powys, Wales, and I was also introduced at one of our AIA conferences to John Brodie's early large panel concrete houses in Eldon Street in Liverpool, which unfortunately have gone. So it's this one, isn't it? Yeah. My work was in part inspired by the fact that I was involved with concrete housing using both Lang's Easyform system and Jespersen system. And here I show the 4 stages of making an Easyform house. And below the finished estate that I worked on at Clanmartin in Monmouthshire. And finally, over here, I show you the stockyard at Jespersen and of her factory. I subsequently learned that my great-grandfather had been a pioneer in the design of concrete block-making machines and housing using his patented system. And here I show you, first of all, a picture of John Carrington Cellars. And what I find fascinating is his design for a block of flats circa 1901. And what's I find particularly good about this block of flats is that it's not only got a lift, it's got district heating, and each flat has a waste disposal system. And finally, over here, he is reported to have been the first person to design and patent a machine for making concrete blocks. So following my attendance at a conference on the working class housing improvement and technology at Rowney House, Oxford in 2014, and several tours of country houses under the guidance of Marilyn Palmer and Ian West, observing their incorporation of technology, it became apparent to me that there was really no serious work had been done into the incorporation of technology into low status houses. And so here I'm showing, first of all, the flyer for the conference I referred to, Marilyn and Ian's book, of course, and 3 pieces of technology that are very definitely solely related to large buildings and certainly don't apply to low status houses. Literary review. A major benefit I had was that over some 40 years, I had assembled a significant library of books, reports, articles, and which during lockdown, I was able to add to without the use of inaccessible libraries. Over the period of this research, I read and considered a very large number of books, journals, articles, reports, and academic papers. I reviewed these first from the point of view of the author and his or her perceived aim. Secondly, on a time basis. In the conclusion I came to was that it is clear that the history of housing has not been considered from the point of view of the inclusion of technology, either over time or otherwise, or by comparison between the types of developer and builder. And it was this that has made my research, I believe, a major contribution to knowledge. And here you can see some of the books that I have in my library. Semi-detached house, experimental cottages. Some of these are reports by government bodies. So the net result of all this came out 2 research questions, and these arose from my preliminary investigations, and which were: 1, was there a direct association between the incorporation of building technologies and techniques, especially building services and domestic appliances, and the manner in which the internal space of low status houses was organized. And the second question was the public sector slower to adopt advances in technology than the private and industrial sectors? Collecting data, the details of houses, both as designed and built, were collected from a range of sources and recorded on house record sheets. These sources included government reports and manuals, trade catalogues, advertisements, articles in trade and other journals, contemporary books and publications, and housing histories. The data, which was mainly in the form of drawings, specifications, and pictures, was varying in detail and involved a certain amount of interpretation. And here I'm going to try and show you some of the interpretation problems that I had to deal with. You look at the two drawings in the top here, you can see that the copper in this one is shown as freestanding, whether the one down here appears to be brick built. Over on the Crittall house, unfortunately hidden by this sign here, is the bathroom. Oh no, there's the bathroom. And this specifically says that there was a water heater over the bath. However, conversely, when you come over to, let me just make sure I'm on the right, yeah, the Industrial Housing Association, you'll see that in the room upstairs, there's a circle in both these two rooms. And that suggests to me that this was a hot water storage tank and probably suggests that these houses had a hot water distribution system. When you come over to this advert over here, you'll see there's quite a detailed specification of what was in the house, but no indication of how it was provided. However, when you look at the elevation of the drawing, elevational drawing of the house, you can see that it shows a single stack chimney towards the rear at the back. And it's from fairly obvious that this suggests that there was a boiler probably in the kitchen or scullery. Similarly, you've got drawings here of houses built by the LCC at Braintree, and you can see the interesting siphon equipment for getting hot water out of the freestanding copper here into the adjacent bath so that you can have a warm bath. When you look at the Crittall house here, there is no indication of what cooking arrangements are made, but you can see that the living room has a very large space for what was almost certainly going to be provision for a cooking range. What we don't know, of course, is whether the cooking ranges would have been provided by the builder or whether or not it would be something that the tenant would have to supply. And finally, looking at this picture, which was on the cover of a brochure for a spec builder, post-war, post-Second World War spec builder, you can see here quite clearly that by that time, he was incorporating blockwork as the inner skin of cavity wall construction. The fields of information included the study of government policy through its published reports. And this slide shows the principal ones that I referred to. First of all, the Tudor Waters report of 1819, which is very frequently referred to, probably more frequently than it justifies. And the one which is never referred to and which I came across and found far more advanced than the Tudor Waters report is the report of the Women's Subcommittee of 1919. The Dudley report was produced was one of three produced by the government during the course of the Second World War. And of course, in my career period, the most famous report was the Parker Morris report, revised first published in 1961 and revised in several times up to 1975. I also looked at a number of other sources, a whole range of copies of building bylaws, which date from the late Victorian period right to when they were changed in 1960, I think it was 65, when the building regulations came into force. I also had early building textbooks, and the earliest one I've got is this one of the late 1800s. The post-war building studies cover a whole range of building topics and were fascinating. The Egan Report, of course, was one of the latter ones published by government on housing. And another document I came across, which I knew nothing about until a few years ago, and that was that there had been this exhibition as part of the Festival of Britain on architecture in East London. So the analysis. To facilitate an analysis and review of the data, a range of features for comparison were identified. And these were, as I list here, house types, room arrangement, construction method, toilet provision, bathroom arrangements, cooking provision, clothes washing, water heating, space heating, and food storage. And for each of these features, a range of subtypes was identified and given a type number. This procedure was widely adopted, I found had been widely adopted by other construction historians. For example, Taylor in the newsletter of the Vernacular Architecture Group in April 21, and Gilbert in the Construction Historian in the summer of the same year. The records also recorded the time period and developer type. The time periods selected roughly relate to the changes in housing policy and were, as you can see here, the First World War, a period of limited house building, mainly for munition workers only. 1919 to 1922, a period of house building predominantly by local authorities. And then 1923 to 39, a period of large-scale private house building. Post-war, 1945 to 1960, was a period of the housing drive to provide a home for every family. And then following on from that, roughly 1961 to 1975, the period of mass slum clearance and the houses from the factory. The developer types I've listed as being state/local authority, commercial developers for the private market, and house builders, houses built by commercial organizations for their staff. The analysis and review, the details identified at stage 1 were transferred to spreadsheet and sorted by both period and developer type. And this produced 12 sub-spreadsheets. A number of statistical analysis methods were considered. However, in order to analyze and review the diversity of data, a manual approach was adopted for each of the 12 sub-spreadsheets, and each type of each feature or facility was counted. The qualitative outcome was then reviewed on a qualitative method and by considering the evidence from other sources. Stage 3 of the analysis, the 4 separate approaches to review the data were carried out, namely a review by period, comparing the houses constructed by different developer types, a review by house space names, i.e. living room, drawing room, whatever, a review by construction methods, and a review by facility types. These reviews made a major contribution to the understanding of house development by being based on original plans and specifications. This analysis was made more significant in making major contribution to the history of housing as a result of my personal involvement in the construction of houses in the latter part of this time frame, and the benefit of having actually lived in houses of the pre-World War II period and prior to their modernization and development. So the findings. I found that there is clear evidence that as houses incorporated the technical developments, the use of space changed. The first change was the incorporation of the WC within the house. The relocation of the bath to the first floor was dependent on either the incorporation of a hot water system or the use of unit heaters. The move from the use of a coal-fired range to freestanding gas and electric cookers led to the scullery becoming the kitchen, together with the improved clothes washing equipment. As a result, 3 possible space layouts were suggested in the Dudley report. His first one was to suggest that a living room with a separate kitchen with space for meals was one possibility. The second was a living room with a recess for meals and a separate kitchen. And finally, just a large living room kitchen or kitchen living room. The fourth, of course, was 3 separate rooms, a living room, dining room, and kitchen, which was the most common in the pre-World War II commercial house. Parker Morris, in his report, strongly recommended that heating the whole house and the use of bedrooms as places for relaxation and socializing was a good idea. So the second lot of the findings, despite the post-First World War trials of advanced water and space heating systems on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries at their experimental estate at Amesbury, Wiltshire, the Dudley report considered that the provision of facilities in interwar council housing was, and I quote directly, deficient in the light of the advance in domestic practice of recent years. In contrast, of course, advertising by commercial developers generally stressed the provision of modern facilities and services. Conversely, private developers did not generally experiment with non-traditional building systems. Almost certainly building in brick, sometimes it was rendered, and post-World War II, generally using cavity wall construction with block inner skins. The evidence in the post-war building study number 1 is that during the interwar period, no less than 44,663 non-traditional council houses had been built. There is evidence also that commercial builders were quicker to adopt labor-saving materials such as plasterboard than architects were to specify them for use in council houses. Interesting that, they're prepared to take, or councils are quite happy to use non-traditional building materials, but they are reluctant to use up-to-date finishing materials. Anyway, to conclude, I would just like to add a few further observations. Firstly, many architects as designers of council houses were influenced very strongly by continental ideas, which generally proved to be unsuitable for the English way of life. While I anticipated that there would be much criticism of interwar speculative housing in the literature, I found it very surprising how much criticism of architects was to be found in the literature. The availability of first gas and later electricity meant that lighting of houses became much improved, with the result that the orientation to make the most of natural light became of less importance. The development of first unit heaters and later central heating systems, especially ducted warm air and later small bore water heating systems, enabled the use of bedrooms for recreational purposes, especially by children and young adults. And finally, the consequence of better heating was the move away from a requirement for permanent ventilation to requirements for thermal insulation, which was to be further developed in succeeding years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'm sure we're all dying to know what continental ideas proved to be unsuitable for the English way of life. What are you suggesting? Don't take that off. You need to answer.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, basically, the idea of multi-story flats, the idea of
Oh, right.
they talk about the house as a factory. You know, I've in my thesis I put it the other way around and said, you know, actually a house is actually the machine, and the factory is the estate and the whole development. And I elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, but you mean that you're talking really about
And
huge flat developments?
Well, I
on the
mean,
continent
Leeds,
was-
of course,
yeah.
they copied the estate in Vienna, which still exists, the Karl Marx Marhof estate, almost architecturally as well, with these great big arches as entrance. Within a few years, people were refusing to live there, you know, and there were even stores saying even the rats have left or something, you know. And I mean, it was demolished within, well, almost as soon as possible. I mean, it was just about complete at the outbreak of the Second World War, and almost as soon as the Second World War was over, they were trying to demolish it and get rid of it.
Hugh, you had a question, I think. Can you speak up? Hang on a moment. Otherwise, I'll translate it, Bill.
Yes, what I was going to say was that the single most feature that did not fit in the English landscape because of the weather was flat roofs, which were, you know, popular on the continent, but simply didn't work here.
Well, there are flat roofs and flat roofs. Right? Unfortunately, Brodie's house at Letchworth Gardens City, if you ever go there, right, appears to have a flat roof. Actually, it's slightly pitched, very slight pitch. Net result is I was lucky enough to be taken up onto the roof when it was about 90 years old. And it had never had more than a little bit of sort of some compound put over it. It hadn't even got felt roof, right? And you know, you had no problems with water going on. Yeah, so a tiny little bit of drainage seems to be all you need, particularly if you've got, you know, large slab construction. And the British Library, as many of you know, I was on the British Library. I mean, all the what appears to be flat roof areas have all got a slight fall. So it's having a flat roof, because flat roofs are never flat. You know, they always dip or they hug, depending on which. I mean, one of the stories I tell is about, you know, you mustn't learn from your mistakes, right? When I was working on the Llanwern Steelworks, we had built the temporary accommodation there, which had all been easy form single-story offices. Then someone obviously decided they needed a canteen, and so someone designed this canteen with a lightweight lattice roof, but they put all the drainage to the outside. So the roof sagged, all the water collected in the middle of the roof, and virtually none went down the rainwater, right? So then they built a director's suite, right? But this time they decided to use Lang's Langspan system, right? Langspan system is pre-stressed, right? The architect knew jolly well that with a flat roof, you've got to put the drains in the middle of the roof. But of course, because it was pre-stressed, all the water went to the sides. And that's what comes when you learn from your mistakes.
Jill, you have a question, I think.
Yeah, I do. John, can we go back to your great-grandfather's block of flats?
Yes.
You said that each flat had a waste disposal system. Can I presume that they each
It was
had?
a rubbish chute. It
Yes,
had a rubbish chute. I mean, they had drainage, of course, but it had a rubbish chute is what I was really trying to say.
But they all, by that stage, he was giving them all private WCs and running water.
Yeah, oh yeah. But of course, it was never built. His, I mean, my great-grandfather was not an entrepreneur. I mean, he designed all sorts of things, and the family believed all sorts of things were sort of half-hitched from him. But of course, when you actually investigate it, you find it's total rubbish. But his system was used twice in houses in Lanark, not New Lanark, Lanark. And when we went out to a conference, that's my wife and I went up to a conference in Glasgow, which was actually looking at Charles Mackintosh and his work. But we had 2 extra days to try and locate these houses in Lanark. And we went to the library in Lanark, and we saw a lady there. She said, oh, well, we know nothing about those, that's all we see. The moment she went for her morning tea, her assistant came up to us with a folder and said, I think this is what you want. And it turned out that the head librarian lady believed that the developer of these properties was an absolute rogue and wasn't going to have anything to do with it. So yeah, she was making us sort of wade through, miles and miles of newspaper things, and then the girl came up and said, "This is what you want."
So the personal element's important. I'm going to send John away. Oh, there's another one with a very difficult question that's facing all of us at the moment. What is wrong with the concrete on the roofs of schools?
Yeah, I haven't heard this one.
Oh, John. He's been so busy with the conference. He hasn't heard it.
I'm not a great reader of
preempted the
newspapers, I must say.
You preempted the lady's question.
You were going to ask that. They're using something, John, called RAAC, R-A-A-C. And as a result, they're closing 150 schools on the day that schools opened.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah, I think you better go and read a newspaper when you have time. I realise you haven't had time lately, but it's what we're all thinking about with concrete at the moment. Thank you very much, John. And
Right. Okay, thank you, everybody. We return to the Peter Neaverson Award for Outstanding Scholarship. All right, can see it. Yeah, all right, yeah. I've got monitor here. Outstanding scholarship in industrial archaeology, but we are now turning to 2022 because we didn't have a conference last year, so we couldn't give awards in 2022. We made awards, but we couldn't present them. Last year, the judges had a number of nominations. And 2 of which were outstanding, so we ducked the issue in the usual fashion, and we gave the award to both of them. I will just digress there for a minute and put a plug in for this outstanding scholarship award. Anyone can make nominations. So if you read something you think qualifies as outstanding scholarship, then the nomination form is on the AIA website. Please send it to us. And if it's an obscure book, we might need you to send the book as well. Anyway, yes, I mean, we welcome nominations from anybody, really. So please bear that in mind. So we had two nominations two winners last year. And unfortunately, one of them was the Built Environment Transformed Textile Anchors During the Industrial Revolution. I shall hold it up there for the benefit of the camera, by Jeff Timmins. Jeff, unfortunately, can't be here because of the rail strikes. He couldn't, he was unable to make the journey other than by rail. And as I'm sure many of you know, there weren't any trains yesterday. So we will present his award another time. Much more sadly, the author of the second winner, David Pollard, died before his book was published. And I think this is the first time we have presented a posthumous award. David's lifelong interest in Bath stone quarries, and that's the name of the book, Digging Bath Stone, which I will also hold up for the book. stand it there. His lifelong interest in Bathstone started when he was an apprentice at Swindon Railway Works, and it led to him becoming an industrial archaeologist, founder and curator of the Bathstone Quarry Museum, and owner of a working quarry. Over more than 50 years, he amassed a huge amount of knowledge and material relating to an industry which has got importance around the world, because Bathstone is obviously an important building material internationally. Huge credit is due to the man on my left, Neil Parkhouse of Lightmore Press, who compiled and finished and edited David's work. As you can see, it's by no means a slight volume. It really is quite a hugely impressive work. It provides details over 100 quarries and producing Bathstone over the years. It also documents the techniques, the language, the lives of the workers, and the infrastructure around it. I am struggling to think of a more comprehensive record of any single industry than this. It really is remarkable. So Neil is going to talk about his involvement and perhaps the story of the book, and then we're also delighted to have David's widow Nina with us today as well. She's waving her hand, and she's going to be at dinner, and she will receive the award then. So thank you. I'll hand over to Neil.
Thank you. Do I need a microphone? Can everybody hear me?
You've got microphone in.
Right, okay, cool. Yes. I thought there was some welcome when he hung something around my neck. I understand that apparently there were blocks of Bathstone quarried that were even bigger than this. There are two types of people in the world. There are people who drive over a railway bridge with their eyes on the road. And there are special people like the rest of us who look to see if there's a train coming. And I mention that because my earliest memories are railway memories. And what I'm about to give you is just a little ramble through basically how I came to get into publishing, how I came to meet David, and how I came to be here. So I apologize for looking at my phone occasionally, but I've made a few notes just to keep me going. The interest in railways really was from probably about 1.5, 2. We left Devon when I was 3.5, and I can remember railway scenes down there. I can't remember much else. It turned into an interest in model railways when I got older, and then into an interest in the railways of the Forest of Dean. And I started collecting material, and it was through that I met a gentleman called Peter Copeland in Gloucester, who in the 40s had photographed everything down in the Forest of Dean, and much of his work has been published by Wild Swan. But I was fortunate to go over to Gloucester and see Peter one time, and whilst going through his albums of photographs, I noticed some coloured card pictures in there, and I said to him, "What are those?" And he said, "They're postcards." And they were seeds in the Forest of Dean from the turn of the century, railways and bits of industry and so on. I was absolutely fascinated. And a week later, I went to my first ever antiques fair and bought a couple of postcards. So cut a long story short, a few years later, I'm a fully fledged postcard dealer, specializing in railways and industrial history. And I started to think there must be more I can do with the images. Just buy them and sell them, it's a waste. Make a little profit, but this stuff interests me, so why can I not do a bit more with it? So I started taking copies, photographic copies initially, because this was sort of pre me getting into computers. And slowly the idea of Archive magazine, I'm sure some of you know, was born. I'd got to know another chap who was very interested in Forest of Dean railways, which is Ian Pope, who's the co-author of many of the books. And Ian and I sort of discussed all these things, and gradually the idea of putting together a journal based initially on the pictures, what we found, what I found around the postcard fairs and so on, collections of collieries and various little railways. And I thought, well, we can put articles together and publish it. So that's how Lightmore Press was born. And initially, that's what we were, Lightmore Press. A few years later, I got a book to publish on Penzance from a chap who became a very good friend and is sadly no longer with us, mad as a box of frog, Clive Carter, lovely guy. And I wanted to do the book, and Ian didn't, so I started a separate imprint. And again, long story short, a few years later, we joined the two back together, which is how we came to be known as Black Dwarf Lightmore Publications Limited, which doesn't fit very well on a checkbook. So that got shortened, and nowadays most people know us as Lightmore Press. So still heavily into the postcards whilst doing the publishing, and I'd met Heather and we got married and we moved down to the Forest of Dean, where we were lucky enough to get married anyway. And we opened a shop, the Archive Shop, which again, some of you know or remember. And I still get people come up to me and say, oh, I must pop round to the shop again one day. And I say, yeah, we closed it in 2003, but feel free. So for a while, the two things went together. We got this embryo publishing imprint, and I was still buying and selling stuff. But slowly, the business, the publishing business took over, and that's where my heart always was. So that's what I concentrated on. But in the meantime, I'd also got very heavily involved with the administration of the postcard trade, the Postcard Traders Association. And we used to do an annual event in one of the big halls in London, Westminster Halls. And it was whilst trading there one year, and we'd be there for 4 days. So you'd get people come and sit at the stand for 2 or 3 hours sometimes and go right through your stock, as opposed to a one-day fair where they'd be there and gone. And this gentleman used to come and sit at the stand, and you've got quite a lot of industrial cards here, haven't you? Yes. What's the interest there then? And we slowly got to know each other over a number of years. David would come, generally it was the only time we ever saw him, once a year at that fair, and he would always come and sit for 2 or 3 hours, and slowly we got to know each other. And then he let on about he'd been compiling this history of Bath Stone. Would you publish it? And I was aware of the size of it, and I was, ooh, okay. He was very insistent. Would you publish it? I'm like, okay. But I was also aware that he was not a well man. And he phoned me and said, it's nearly finished. Can you come over? And we'd arranged to go over. And very sadly, he passed before I got there. But I'd made him a promise, and I stuck to it. Apologies. He was a lovely guy. It was his life's work, and it deserved to be out there. So thank you for listening to me ramble through this. My dad was a member of the AIA. He passed in 2006. If he's looking down, he would be over the moon about me being here and about you awarding this to this book. And I thank you for that. And I thank you very much for listening to me. And I do apologise for getting a little bit emotional there, but
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Leave you with that.
Yes.
Not good to go to the gym
No,
wearing it.
because I'll.
Go for that around your neck, please.
You've heard John McGuinness talk about his PhD. As with other awards this year, we had good entries, and we didn't like to deprive one person of not getting what he was supposed to get. And that's why Anthony Anakin Smith is here with us today. His PhD is on the Neston Collieries Industrial Revolution in Cheshire. When it was sent to me, it was sent as a book, and I thought, But in addition to that, he did a commentary for a PhD by publication, which is not something we've really dealt with before. They've always been straightforward dissertations rather than ones, you know, with that sort of addition. He also said that when I read his description, that he'd used the process of microhistory, which I then had to look up on the internet. I did train as a historian, but we didn't know about microhistory then. And I seem to remember with my own PhD students suggesting they left a lot out, which is not what you did. So you used a different approach. So do tell us about that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. And well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honour and a privilege to address this august institution, especially in its 50th anniversary year. So congratulations. And of course, it's also a great honour to be awarded the Dissertation Prize, for which I have to thank the judges very much. I'm not sure who the judges were. I guess Marilyn was one, but I'm not sure who else I should be thanking, but thank you anyway to them. My talk is in two parts. As Marilyn has said, my study area was the nest and collieries, and so I want to introduce you to the collieries and just why I find them interesting. And I've just picked out a few points about them that I think are interesting, but there's a whole load of other stuff I could have talked about. In fact, I've left loads of stuff out. I had to axe lots of stuff. But I'll introduce you to the nest and collieries, and then I'll make a few comments about my dissertation and the commentary and the approach I took to it, which Marilyn has alluded to there. But let's start really by setting the scene in terms of place and time. So, I hope that's going to work. It's not going to work. Why is it not working? Yeah, technician. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Right. Thank you very much. Right. So for those of you who don't know anything about Neston, and there's probably not many reasons why you should. Neston is in the northwest of England. It's in Cheshire. It's on the Wirral Peninsula, tucked up there between Liverpool and Chester. And here's a slightly more detailed map. So we have the Wirral Peninsula sticking up there, and that grey area, the grey shaded area, is the Flintshire coalfield. So the Flintshire coalfield, of course, is principally in Flintshire, but it carries on under the River Dee, under the Dee estuary, and just pops up on the Wirral Peninsula near Neston. And that gave rise to the two collieries that were the focus of my book, Little Neston Colliery and, most importantly, Nest Colliery. And this was the earliest, the first large-scale industrial area anywhere in West Cheshire. And if you get the chance to go there at all, it is a very, very beautiful spot. I often lead walks there, and people are gobsmacked that this place with fantastic views, amazing sunsets, beautiful reed beds, and a lovely little pub there, top left, gorgeous pub with great views. This was once an industrial area and a hell on earth, frankly. But yeah, do take the chance to visit if you ever can. So that's the location. And in terms of time, there were two periods of mining at Neston. There was a later period in green here, which I'm not going to talk about today and wasn't talked about in my book, but I was more interested in the early collieries, and in particularly Nest Colliery, opened 1759, closed 1855. And for a period of time, there was another colliery operating alongside, about 30 years, Little Neston Colliery. The most important one by far was Nest Colliery in terms of longevity and production levels and all that kind of stuff. And rather neatly, the period that Nest Colliery was opened coincides broadly with the Industrial Revolution. Now, we could have lots of debates here about whether the Industrial Revolution is a suitable phrase and when it was and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, most people would tend to agree that the Industrial Revolution, such as it was, spanned sort of 1750 to 1850 at least. And that more or less coincides with Nest Colliery, when Nest Colliery was open. So my study really was looking at Nest Colliery, but in the context of the Industrial Revolution and how it sat with that. So that's an introduction really to the collieries. And just a few points of interest that I've picked out. Firstly, almost all the working was offshore. And the reason for that, going back to this map, is that only a tiny exposure of the coal measures was on the Wirral Peninsula, or was underlay the Wirral Peninsula. Most of the coal was under the estuary and then into North Wales. So all the working was going on under the estuary, or almost all the working was going on under the estuary. That's not unique. There were other collieries, of course, around the country that were working under sea. But it did add a particular challenges to mining there. They've got to cope with tidal inundations coming in, of course, twice a day. And the workings were very shallow. I have a geological map here. So we have North Wales on the left-hand side and Wirral on the right-hand side, the orangey, pinky stuff, that's sandstone. They couldn't mine in the sandstone, so they were mining out under the estuary. But the coal measures were very shallow. They were immediately below the level of the river. So they had to be careful. They didn't actually burrow into the bed of the river and create an inundation. And indeed, that is what happened in North Wales and closed a key mine in North Wales. And we have some lovely plans of the colliery showing the showing pillar and stall under the estuary there. And I reproduce some of these in my book. So that added a layer of complexity. And one of the other challenges that going out under the estuary created was, how do you get the coal from the coal face back to the shoreline where it can be hoisted up the shaft and taken off to wherever it needs to go to? And the innovative solution they came up with, Neston, was to use underground navigations, canals, if you like. And there were a couple of navigations, more than a mile long, at 60 yards and 94 yards depth, and they used boats similar to these. That's a Starvationer. Now, this one was used at Worsley in northwest Manchester, and Worsley was one of the very few. Worsley and Ness were the very few collieries in the country that used underground canals that were solely underground. There are various collieries that had canals that were linked to surface canals, if the topography was right. But in terms of canals that were entirely underground, there were very, very few in the country. More common in metalliferous mines, but in terms of coal mines, very rare indeed. So Ness is almost unique in that regard. And I've just reproduced here one plan showing a navigation coming out. It's labeled number 10 navigation, not because there were 10 of them, but because it came to pit number 10 on the shoreline there. And I like to picture this. Apparently I can't use the pointer. I need to use this because otherwise people online can't see. But here is a pier, or it's a shipping quay that's sticking out. And so ships used to moor here to load coal. I do like the concept of ships going up and down the estuary to Chester or to the pier or wherever else. And then yards below, there's boats going backwards and forwards at 90 degrees. It's an extraordinary concept. If I had to pick out one thing that makes the Neston collieries remarkable, and I still was gobsmacked even though I know all about it, is the use of sabotage. And it was explicit and blatant at the collieries. And it was perpetrated by Ness Colliery, the dominant colliery, owned by a baronet, no less, Sir Thomas Stanley. And he objected to the adjacent colliery of Little Neston opening, which was owned by the lowly Thomas Cottingham. And Thomas Stanley lost no opportunity to beat up Cottingham whenever he could in terms of his colliery. And we have all sorts of instances of that. Here they are. Here's the two collieries adjacent to each other. I'll point on this again. So here we have Ness Colliery here, the dominant colliery, and then Little Neston Colliery sharing the coal measures here, just there, and then going out under the estuary. And just a few instances three instances of sabotage. Firstly, in 1821, Little Neston Colliery's steam engine was smashed. So the Little Neston Colliery just opened, and steam engines were still relatively new technology and very expensive bits of kit. And Cottingham comes along one day and finds his steam engine smashed. And we know that because I found this wonderful reward poster in the National Archives talking about the willful and malicious damage of a certain engine used for drawing coals. out of Little Neston Colliery. So this was Nest Colliery objecting to Little Neston Colliery, but it didn't stop there. In fact, that was a minor point really. In September 1821, Little Neston Colliery was blown up. So, I mean, it is what it says on the tin. The Cottinghams saw the people at Nest Colliery going underground, bringing all their equipment up from underground. And a short while later, Cottingham hears this enormous explosion and his mine is just blown to smithereens. And all the coal, which needs to be in nice large lumps, was blown into fragments and made that whole area, his principal area of the mine, completely useless. And this all went to court. So we have this situation of a baronet, one of the aristocracy of this country, in court in Chester, being charged with blowing up a neighbouring mine. And unsurprisingly, he lost the court case. But it didn't stop there, because Thomas Stanley was a vindictive, mean, nasty bit of work, and I give various instances in the book. And he decided that if he couldn't win in terms of blowing up the Cottingham mine, then what he'd do instead was flood it. So he literally turned off his pumps and allowed the water levels in his own mine to rise, so the water would then flood or flow down the geology, the coal strata, into Cottingham's mine and flood it. And Cottingham desperately worked hard to try and work some particular areas of the mine before the floods overtook. But it's all documented. It's all down there in black and white. It's just extraordinary stuff, sabotage. So that's, to me, that's utterly remarkable that a baronet would do that kind of thing. Something else that makes the Nest Colliery remarkable is connections to famous people, and the most famous was Emma Hamilton, who, of course, you will know was mistress to Admiral Lord Nelson, but she she was born in the humblest of circumstances. She was the daughter of the colliery blacksmith at Ness, and was born there, and then rose through society to hobnob with the people at the very peak of society, ambassadors, lords, and goodness knows who else, senior military figures. And of course, if you know her story, the trajectory then went in the other direction. She actually died in poverty, so rags to riches to rags. But it all started at Ness. And other famous people associated with Ness Colliery are all engineers. James Brindley was looked to bring one of the earliest canals in the country to Ness Colliery. It didn't actually happen in the end, but that was potentially on the books. George Stephenson looked to bring a railway to the colliery area. He didn't, but Stephenson knew very well the Cadbury family who worked at Ness Colliery. The Cadburys are a well-known family of northeastern engineers, and for several decades, members of the Cadbury family were working at Ness Colliery. So a lot of the stuff I've talked about so far has been operational, but from a social perspective, one of the things that I like, and I spend a lot of time in the book talking about social aspects of the mines, was a subscription to Chester Infirmary. Now, if we roll back to the mid-18th century, this was a time when there were very few provincial hospitals. The idea of hospitals or infirmaries was just beginning to become established in the country. And what we had was if you wanted to take advantage of the services of an infirmary, you paid a subscription, and then you could that would allow treatment for yourself or other people that you nominated. And this is the earliest infirmary, top left there at Chester. And in fact, that building still stands. It's changed radically, but it still stands. And but Ness Colliery paid a subscription, a multiple subscription, to enable colliers to be treated. And this is, to my mind, that's the incredibly radical, far-sighted kind of thing to do. Employer-sponsored medical insurance for your employees in 1760s, 1770s. Remarkable stuff, I think. And indeed, it wasn't just the colliers who were treated, but also their wives and children. Another non-operational thing, but I think is remarkable, is they created a business logo. This is in the days before marketing, before the word marketing hadn't been invented then, literally. But they had their own form of branding. Here's a receipt, and you can see there up at the top left this logo. Well, I'll get it on the next slide. A nice. So they were creating this. There were virtually no business logos in the 18th century. You had Wedgwood had trademarks, and Lipton's tea had, Twining's tea had a logo, but I found no other industrial outfit that had its own logo at that time. I've researched. If anyone knows of any, please do tell me. And a final point I'd make, and as I say, I could have made many more, and I've taken various points out, but a final point I would make is that the coal from Ness went as far as Barbados. And I showed you this picture earlier on with a lovely pub called the Harp on the top left-hand side there. But the thing we're looking at here, this sandstone thing, is a shipping quay. It was built in 1790, and ships would moor alongside. Coal will be loaded, taken off to wherever. And it went around the British coast. It went to Ireland. It went to Europe. But for reasons of quickness, I'm just mentioning here, it also went even transatlantic to Newfoundland, New York, and Barbados. And the reason why isn't because there was a great demand for Neston coal in Barbados, but because ships wanted to go to Barbados to bring back sugar, for example, or whatever else was being grown in these various places or being collected. And so as ballast for the vessels, they would take a load which gave stability to the ship, but also had commercial value when they got to the other end as well. So that's why the coal was going there. So that's really an introduction to the Neston collieries. And I now just want to talk a little bit about the dissertation that I submitted and which has been kindly awarded a prize. So as Marilyn pointed out, it was a PhD by publication that I undertook. It was at the University of Portsmouth, and it was based upon a book I had written, 390 pages on the Neston collieries, 1759 to 1855. So I believe that this is the first instance of a PhD by publication being awarded the dissertation prize by the AIA. So I'm very proud of that. Thank you. So the book was published by the University of Chester Press, and in addition, I had to submit for the PhD a 10,000-word commentary demonstrating the book's significance and contribution to knowledge. And I'm very happy to make that available to anyone should they wish to see it. And there was also a viva involved too. And as Marilyn alluded to, the book was, or is, a microhistory. So I could spend a long time talking about microhistories, but in simple terms, they focus on small units of research. They just focus on something, but go into a lot of detail about that something. It could be an event, community, individual, or business, to explore larger themes. And I come back to this point about this was all happening at the time of the Industrial Revolution. So the question I was posing really was, how do these collieries exemplify this thing called the Industrial Revolution? Were they experiencing a revolution? Did the people, the colliers, would they have said, oh, this is a revolutionary time, or actually was yesterday pretty well like tomorrow? I've read a well-known writer said that the Northwest was an area of coherent structural and economic integrity. Well, did Ness fit into a coherent structural and economic, or into that integrity? I asked the question. Coal output grew massively in the country at this time. Did Ness's coal grow? Do every colliery's coal output grow massively? And so on and so on. So the idea is you move away from the general and you get to the specific, and it's the exceptions that are as interesting as the things that go with the trend. And the overall aim is to gain insight into how the large was felt by the small. So how did this revolution feel to people on the ground? Now, one of the things I wanted to do was be completely comprehensive in my coverage of the collieries. I'm not going to go through chapter by chapter here, but there are 13 chapters in total. Sorry, 14 chapters in total, and you can see them there. So obviously I spent a lot of time talking about technology and operations and all that kind of stuff. But I also spent a lot of time talking about marketing and customers and transport to markets. Somebody, or a couple of reviewers said that books on coal mining tend to focus on the operational and technological aspects, but tend to stop at that point and not look enough at customers and transport. But I wanted to cover all of that. And similarly, well, chapter 13, the social aspects, was by far the longest chapter in the book. And that was all about the lives of the miners, the health, mortality, family size, education, religion, benefits, all that kind of stuff. And that's all in there, a lot of information about the colliers and their lives during the period under review. Now, some reviewers have said that the book is unique in its approach. I would hesitate to say that because someone might come out of the audience and say, oh no, it's happened somewhere else. So I won't do that. But I haven't come across a book that does anything similar. And the points are really that it's a focus on a single business. It's that focus that is a key to a micro history. It's just getting into detail on, okay, a Nest Colliery as a business. There was Little Nest and Colliery as well, but primarily Nest Colliery, very focused, not an industry generally or a region, but just one colliery. And particularly a focus on the early time period. You will find a lot of, if there are studies of collieries, they tend to be Victorian period, maybe into 20th century, that kind of thing, but very few going back to the mid 18th century. And in fact, I'm not going to name him, but I had some correspondence with a well-known or a leading coal historian, and he said to me in an email that he liked the book because, quotes, I tend to look at anything before about 1830 in despair and anything before about 1870 with deep misgivings. So, and he thought the book broke the mold from that point of view. I've used as many sources as I could possibly lay my hands on. There are over 400 primary sources cited in the book and 340 secondary sources cited. And the depth and breadth of coverage, therefore, I felt I had to, or to tell the story properly, I had to look at every aspect of the mines. So the depth and breadth of coverage is, I hope, unrivaled or relatively unrivaled. And just to add just a couple of details, and then I'll wind up, just a couple of examples. I wanted to be able to take what I call a macro-micro view. So I wanted to be able to look at subjects as a whole, but then focus in on an individual level. And two examples I'll give you. One is collier databases. So I've traced 600 men who had worked at the mines and found records in the places I've listed there and many other places as well. And I've put them all online for free. I'll put the website address on at the end of this presentation, and you can go on there. You don't have to sign in or register or anything like that. You can just start exploring the stuff. And here is one of the databases. Each color represents a different collier, and each line represents a different piece of information about that collier. And for some people, I can only get one piece of information. For others, it might be 10 or 15. You can explore that in your own time, but once you start gathering that data, you can start exploring life stories. You can find out about their families or their job mobility or their accidents. And you can start to see how lives developed. And so I like finding that individual information, but also at an aggregate level, we can start looking at the colliery community as a whole, and what percentage could read or write, or what percentage went to such and such a church or had so many children or whatever. So you can look at the big picture and you can look at the little picture. And that's one characteristic of this study. And I did a similar kind of thing with the sea sail trade, where I looked at thousands of voyages over 20+ years. And so you can find out about individual ships, their individual journeys, what happened to them. Maybe they were wrecked somewhere, maybe they had problems with customs, whatever it might be. And so you can start finding out interesting things about individual journeys, but also the coal trade as a whole. And I think I found out important things about the significance of the coal trade to Chester and Northwest England more generally. So to summarize, what I've sought to do in the book and then the accompanying commentary, which was all submitted to the AIA, was give a holistic 360-degree view of a British colliery, and a British colliery that was operating at the time of the Industrial Revolution. And all the time I've tried to contextualize what is going on at a micro level with what is going on at a macro level across the country. It enables me to move beyond the generalized, to move beyond the, oh, well, coal output was growing or everyone experienced revolution or whatever it might be. You go beyond that to actually look at what's happening in one place and how it was typical or atypical. And I think what I was very keen to do was explore the lived experience of those involved. That includes colliery owners and traders, shipping traders and so on, but most importantly, the colliers themselves and what their lives were like and the lives for their wives and children too. So that was that's really what the book was about and what was then summarized in the commentary and explained in the commentary, and as I say, what was submitted to the AIA. And as I said at the beginning, as a result, I'm delighted and very proud to have been awarded the Dissertation Award. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You obviously convinced the examiners and you convinced me. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll see you later. We've just got two final presentations this afternoon. The bar's not open yet, honest. I'm going to ask Misaki to come and talk, but where's he gone? Miles, he's on the back, said he would do a short presentation on Tiki. I thought you had one. Memory stick. Yes, that's fine. Yep. We've heard a lot about Tiki. Miles is the chairman of Tiki, so it's a good opportunity to have a short refreshment on that. Now, I'm moving out of range because I'm just trying to find this. Misaki, if you'd like to come. I was delighted to receive this book in Japanese. It has the most superb photographs in it. As you can, I'm sure you recognize, except I can't get it quite down, the mill on the front cover. So it was a Japanese view of British industrial heritage, which is amazing to read. Because it's in Japanese, our rules don't allow us to give it an award. However, since then, Misaki has done an English translation, which I was able to read in conjunction with this. But I will leave it on the table and you can see just how much detail he's gone into on our industrial heritage, particularly on the smaller items of industrial heritage that we don't often see. So would you like to explain how it came about?
Okay, thank you very much for our introduction. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I'm very much honored, literally honored to receive this honorable mention in this AIA Society. I'm very much I'm so happy, and probably this is kind of a milestone in my life, of my academic life. And actually, I'm working as a professor at the Kindai University in Osaka, Japan. And my background is civil engineering, but I switched to the more like heritage stuff after my PhD. And yes, my major interest is about the industrial landscape, just like the title of this book, Industrial Landscape, which I call the technoscape, the landscape of the technology. And and since my doctoral thesis, I made a lot of research about the industrial stuff, or including the industrial heritage. And recently, I'm focusing on more like the limestone industry, which I published in a different book. It's in 2017. and which was awarded in the 3 different academic societies, but just in Japan, and it's about the Japanese industry. And also recently, I'm very much working hard for the pulp and paper making industry too, which I made a presentation at the Royal Geographic Society the day before yesterday in London. And so anyway, and also I'm probably some of you, I hope still remember me, my face, because I'm very much involved in the water supply heritage too. This is not the first time for me to visit the AIA. Actually, it was last year I participated online, but in 2012, I participated in Dundee and made the presentation about the drinking fountains in Britain. It was kind of that crazy, kind of crazy presentation, but I'm really involved in such a kind of possessed in the industrial heritage in Britain. And okay, maybe I should talk about the history of me and the British the industrial landscape. When I visited UK for the first time, it was 1997. It's quite a long time ago. It's 26 years ago. I can't believe that. But anyway, it was just 1 year after I finished my doctoral thesis in 1996. It is about the technoscape. So at that time, I was kind of still very young, and I was kind of, how can I say? I thought that I completed everything about the technoscape. So then I will visit Britain as a reference. But when I land off the Heathrow Airport and I walk around London and I look at the Lots Road generation stations or the Bankside power station. It was still ruined at the time in 1997. And also the Battersea power station, it was not like that at present. But I was so much surprised and shocked. And I thought that everything I proved in my doctoral thesis has already been proved or in Britain. Or it's just probably it must be just the common sense for the general British people. I mean the theory I established in my doctoral thesis. So since then, I was possessed by the British industrial landscape and industrial heritage. And after that, almost every summer I've been visiting the Britain for the conference. Actually, conference is a very best excuse to escape from my university. But but anyway, I did that, and we made the wedding ceremony at the St. John's Baptist Church in London. It is quite a rare case, and we made a honeymoon to the Manchester and Glasgow. Yes, everyone laughs about that when I say that. It's quite yes. Most of my British friends, including my supervisor at the University of Cambridge, said that it is quite rare, even as a Briton, to have a honeymoon in Manchester. But anyway, it was a very nice city, as you know very well, and probably in this room, it's not rare at all. Probably, I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, so we spent the time like that. It was very good. Glasgow was a very fantastic industrial city too. And also every summer, I keep visiting the Britain. And after the conference, I drive around to see a lot of industrial heritage or industrial landscape. And this morning, I checked my list of where I have visited in Britain and where I'm going to visit in Britain. I mean the industrial landscape. So I counted the numbers. The number is doesn't mean so much, but so far I have visited industrial site or civil engineering heritage site in Britain, 2,572 sites. Here yesterday. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Just here yesterday. So it will be more because after this conference, I will be up around again. So it will be more next week anyway. So it is for about about 26 years, including 1 year researching stay in the University of Cambridge. So I could spend one more year, 1 year there. So it was a big deal. So this 2,572 includes the 250 bridges and 323 drinking fountains. Probably your favorite. And 158 village pumps, and the 39 pillar fountains, which I can say the hydrants, or sometimes you call the hydrants, or some regions say the pillar fountains or the standpipes. I don't know which one is the correct, but anyway, the calling ways name is a bit different by the region. With the lion head, the pillar fountain with the lion head, standpipes, and 80 water towers, and 137 defense heritage, including the quite fascinating pillbox with the surrounded by the bright yellow rape blossoms in the Cambridgeshire, and also a very tiny small spigot mortar in the Hampshire. That's very fantastic one too. And also 54 windmill or 63 pumping stations. But anyway, it is not just the numbers, but yes, probably it will be more and more. But I really want to observe and learn from this fantastic country, which actually in terms of the technology, we Japanese learned a lot from the Britain. I mean, after the Meiji Restoration and in the process of the modernization, we learned a lot, as you know very well. So we asked the engineers from the Britain to build the water water supply system or bridges. But now I think it is the time to learn how to appreciate, how to respect, and how to locally attach with the industrial landscape or industrial heritage. So I think it is now we are in this stage. So I think in this timing, it was very nice to receive such a great honorable mention in this AIA society. And actually, the Professor Marilyn Upstone has my copy, and I brought several copies too. So if you are interested, actually, as you know, it is extremely expensive if you buy the Japanese book. International trade is cost very much. So if you try to get it, it will cost too much. But I have copy today. So and also luckily, because of the recent economic regression of Japan, the yen is very cheap now. Very weak. I'm very proud of being weak. So the price is much lower than before. And I can give you some discounts, big discounts. So if you are really interested, just let me know anytime. Then I have some copies. So I'm very happy to offer you with a special offer. Okay, so it is still, my research is still in progress, still in process. So it's not the completion. So I really want to pursue my research about the technoscape and the industrial heritage. And I will try to find the chance to come back here again to attend this AIA as far as the schedule matches. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
It's really worth looking at all the pictures of drinking services. And I received a copy of that. So thank you,
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Right, so our
Yes.
item, we're going internationally in the class is going updated on Kilns, which I'm sure all of you know would be.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marilyn. And first, let me say what a pleasure it has already been to be at this conference. It's marvelous to meet new friends and to meet so many old friends. And I hadn't actually twigged because I hadn't been paying attention, but this is the first conference of the AIA for a few years because of the pandemic, a proper in the flesh. Yeah, so it's an extra special situation, and it really does have a buzz. It's just really exciting and lovely to be here. And obviously the AIA isn't the only organization that has suffered similar problems over the last few years, and TICI has suffered the same. So I thought I would give a quick rundown on what's happened recently and how TICI has changed, is changing really rapidly, really not necessarily because we wanted to, but because we've had to, and because the new technologies that we have available to us that have sort of turbocharged us into a new era, as we see here, and Bill's incredible technical performance allows us to do things we could never do before, and to reach audiences that we never could dream of reaching in the past, but not without deep stress, particularly hybrid meetings, and you've coped brilliantly today with one or two technical hitches. So it's really, we've entered a new era, and we've been empowered whilst at the same time being simultaneously terrified. So in addition, I'm going to run through a very quick presentation I've just prepared, which will be full of errors because I've adapted it and recycled it in true sort of sustainability form. I'm just going to mention a wee thing that's going on. Some of you will have been aware that the relationship between TICI in the UK and the AIA has not grown particularly in the last few years. And I think we need to address that now. And so I've already been talking to council members about really getting that bond back together. But there's also a few other things happening in the background, one of which is, as Brandy knows, we've been working with ICOMOS, with whom we have an agreement. And there is a plan to put together a national committee of industrial heritage, combining ICOMOS and TICI, which exists in many other countries. And what we'd like to do is to make the AIA a core part of that process, because the expertise and grassroots resource that the AIA is so important and will be vital to that process. So watch this space as Brandy and ourselves, we try and get together with council and try and really start to try and revitalize industrial heritage in the UK, because quite frankly, it seems to be slightly slipping behind other countries where it's really been revitalized and is really moving forward. So are we up and running with this? Okay, so this is hopefully a bit of light relief, and I'm using the Congress as it was in Montreal and Quebec, just to convey what's been happening with TICI. And it was just like this conference. This was, thanks, Bill. It was the first conference that we'd had in the flesh, and fraught with risk, because we already had to delay it by a year, and we didn't know who'd turn up. People got COVID and canceled at the last minute, and were deeply frustrated. So in the end, we got about 330 people, which was astonishing. It still made a significant loss, which the University of Quebec has had to carry, but it was an amazing event, and hugely brilliantly managed by our host, Professor Lucy Morrissey. So it was absolutely tremendous, great facilities. We had lots of incredible sessions, different sessions and workshops, looking at technical things, looking at very much more soft social subjects, so a full range, many countries represented, and some really interesting science, because most of us are aware of large rusting steel structures, often very prominent landmarks that are in need of tender loving care, but there's no budget to deal with them. So we need to work out new coating systems that can address crevice corrosion. So we have the Germans and the Canadians doing that. Fantastic support on the ground, lots of students, postgrads in particular, helping, and a quite youthful, quite diverse set of delegates as well. There's Lucy. Some tremendous venues where we met, and Lucy was a bit like she was wired up to Langley, Virginia. She had sort of a microphone, and she was telling off contractors and caterers and getting everything to work right. But the biggest thing we did, and I think this is a really telling detail about how you run a conference, is in the past few conferences we've had a session where about a couple of hours, and we've had reports from national representatives. And what we did was devote a whole morning to this. And even then there wasn't enough time. And it was one of the most gripping, compelling parts of what we did. And we had lots of new countries like Jordan, And we even had consuls in attendance, Philippines. It was absolutely incredible. And these will be published. And we're going to make even more of this next time because you really got a global sense of what's going on and the different, huge range of things that are going on in the world. So that was fabulous. Apart from that, we've been signing agreements. So we just signed an agreement with, wait for it, the Fédération Internationale Véhiculaire Ancienne, which is the historic vehicles people. So we're trying to team up with other international organizations, which is excellent. We've been signing agreement. We just did this just before, well, 2019. So this was in Russia. So we signed an agreement with Russia, and managing the Russia-Ukraine situation is delicate, bearing in mind our charter is the Nizhny Tagil Charter. So we have Russian friends who are in a desperate situation. We have Ukrainian friends who are in even more desperate situations. So we're having to manage that. We've been opening up channels in the Middle East. Now, you might think that's unlikely, but it's been extraordinary. And I can talk to you about quite how that's worked. But life in Saudi Arabia is not what it was. There's no religious police anymore. Most of the people we're working with are young women in the ministry. So it's a really fascinating situation. So Egypt, Jordan, lots of other Middle Eastern countries we're now talking to, as well as Africa. We've opened up channels in Africa as well. These are our Jordanian friends who produce something called the Industrial Heritage House, which they used to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers and a management consultants. What they did was absolutely brilliant and got us thinking outside the box. So we have a framework from which we can develop industrial heritage strategies with which to address politicians. And then there was this, Piotr, is Piotr here? Piotr mentioned this railway bridge this morning in his presentation. So we've been doing advocacy work, and this was the bridge that Tom Cruise wanted to blow up, and this is Piotr doing his thing on national TV, and this is the first time my signature has appeared on television, on a news program on the left-hand side. It was hugely exciting. They apparently, I asked them, what did they do? Did they find another bridge to blow up? And they said, yes. I said, where was it? And they said, Scotland. So we don't actually know, we don't know where they blew up in Scotland. So I've got to see the movie to find out what was, apparently it was a fake bridge, so no need to worry. And in the middle of the pandemic, somebody sent me this. Has anybody ever seen this? Anybody from Australia? This is the Barwon Ovoid Sewer Aqueduct in Geelong. And it was designed by and completed in 1915, based on the Forth Bridge, but built out of reinforced concrete to carry ship, basically, quite literally. And it's under threat. So this is what our Australian Tiki-Irkamosk Joint Committee is trying to do something about saving. And the whole story about this period of concrete development in Australia just opened up because of COVID. So very, very strange. We've had thematic studies. So Mark, who's in the back there, with his colleagues Heike Overman and Bartosz Walczak, led this. And we had, during COVID, we had online meetings and the book was finally published. We've had petroleum as well, which was a really interesting process. And the results of that are ongoing with a potential World Heritage nomination. So that's been exciting. And then we had IPI, and this was one of the best pizzas I've ever had with Massimo. In Rome. That was an amazing again explosion out of lockdown. We have a new secretary, a new board full of some people you may recognize, and Leonor's taken over from David Worth as our treasurer, and it's a really a new era for us. And as Neil can confirm, we're really trying to modernize, to deal with the new versions we heard of the Nizhny Tagil Charter, and also our statutes are so old, we really need to do something about those. And the biggest change has been Stephen Hughes, who you all know, stepped down as Secretary General, and we now have Marilyn Steiner, Marion Steiner, Dr. Steiner, who's based in Valparaiso in Chile. And she is a driving force, a youthful driving force that's taking us forward. So that's a huge thing. And one last postscript, I couldn't resist doing this. I do apologize. But we had a wonderful, wonderful experience invited to Japan last November to look at a number of things and to be part of the Tiki Japan Day. And it's great to report how active Tiki is in Japan. So it's a tremendous day for lots and lots of reasons, but not least because we tried to check into a robot hotel in Tokyo. So this is Masaki and colleagues bewildered by the fact that there was no human actually behind the desk. And it's just a measure of just how absolutely wonderful Japan is. I thoroughly recommend you go if you haven't been already. So Japan is one of many countries that have a very strong Tiki group, and it's a pleasure to be part of them. I've gone on for too long, and this was unprovoked. Well, no, not unprovoked. This was unprepared, but I just thought it'd be fun to share it with you, and to say that all of you are most welcome to interact with Tiki, especially as our collaborations grow and Brandy and myself and others and Mark get going. If you choose to join Tiki, we have a very different subscription system that's based on affordability. So if you want to get the bulletin and keep in touch with us, that's the best way of doing it and networking into the global network. You'd be most welcome to do that. And if you have any questions over the next 24 hours, come and talk to me or Mark. Great, thanks very much. Thank you, Marilyn.
Can you write some of that up for IA News?
Of course.
If you wrote it for IA News, we'd know how to subscribe to Tiki.
Yes, of course.
I mean, that's the way to communicate.
Indeed, it is.
Really.
It is. Yep. Yep.
Thank you. That was very good. And many thanks to Bill for again managing this afternoon as well as this morning.